The elevator doors opened with a mechanical groan, and Marcus Reed wheeled his mop bucket into the lobby of Whitmore Tower at 11:30 at night. The marble floors gleamed under halogen lights, reflecting nothing but emptiness. Security had already made their rounds. The night shift accountants had gone home. Marcus was alone with 20,000 square feet of polished stone and the dull ache in his lower back that never quite went away. He was 42 years old and invisible. He pushed the bucket toward the East Wing restrooms when he heard it. A soft whimpering. A child's cry, muffled and frightened, coming from somewhere near the executive elevators. Marcus stopped, listened. There, a little girl sat crumpled on the floor beside an overturned wheelchair. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her leg braces were twisted awkwardly beneath her, and tears streaked her face. The wheelchair lay on its side 3 feet away, one wheel still spinning slowly. "Hey, sweetheart." Marcus dropped to one knee, his janitor's uniform still damp from cleaning the third-floor bathrooms. "You okay?" The girl looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. She tried to speak, but only managed a hiccup. "It's all right. I'm gonna help you, okay?" Marcus reached out carefully, checking her arms and legs for obvious injury. Nothing broken, just scared. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Emma, that's a pretty name. I'm Marcus. Can you tell me what happened?" "My chair." Her voice broke. It tipped when I tried to reach the button. "Mommy's upstairs in a meeting and I wanted to surprise her, but now it's broken and she's gonna be so mad." Marcus glanced at the wheelchair. The left wheel had come completely off its axle. The frame was bent near the footrest. This wasn't a simple fix. "Your mommy's not gonna be mad, Emma. Accidents happen." He stood and examined the chair more closely. 20 years ago, before his wife died, before single parent had swallowed his engineering degree whole, Marcus had worked in medical device design. He'd specialized in mobility equipment. That life felt like someone else's dream now, but his hands still remembered. He knelt beside the wheelchair and ran his fingers along the damaged axle. The housing was cracked but not shattered. If he could reline the bracket and wedge the wheel back on, it might hold long enough to get Emma upstairs. "You know what? I think I can fix this." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Really? But I'm gonna need you to be brave for me. Okay? Can you sit right there and keep being brave?" She nodded. Marcus went to his supply cart and pulled out a small toolkit he kept for minor repairs around the building. Screwdrivers, pliers, electrical tape, a rubber mallet. He returned to the wheelchair and got to work. His fingers moved with practiced precision. Reline the bracket. Force the axle back into position. Wedge a rubber washer from his toolkit between the housing and the wheel to create tension. Wrap the whole assembly in layers of electrical tape for temporary stability. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. 10 minutes later, he had the wheelchair upright and functional. "All right, Emma, let's get you back in your chair." He lifted her gently, careful of her braces, and settled her into the seat. She tested the wheels with both hands. They rolled smoothly. "It works." Her face lit up with the kind of pure joy Marcus only saw in his own daughter anymore. "It'll get you where you need to go tonight, but you're gonna need a real repair soon. Okay?" "Thank you, Marcus." Emma threw her thin arms around his neck and squeezed. Something in his chest cracked open. He thought of his daughter, Lily, asleep right now in their tiny apartment across town. She was 8. She'd hugged him exactly like this yesterday morning before school. "You're welcome, kiddo." He helped Emma into the executive elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The doors closed. Marcus watched the numbers climb on the display until they reached 42 and stopped. He went back to mopping. What Marcus didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire time. In the shadows of the executive corridor, standing perfectly still beside a marble column, Richard Whitmore had witnessed everything. He'd been working late in his private office, reviewing acquisition documents, when he'd heard his daughter's cry. He'd stepped into the hallway just as the janitor knelt beside Emma. Richard was a man who prided himself on observation. He'd built a $12 billion real estate empire by reading people, by seeing through the masks they wore, by understanding the difference between performance and authenticity. And what he'd just watched was the most genuine act of kindness he'd seen in 5 years. The janitor hadn't hesitated, hadn't asked questions, hadn't sought recognition or reward. He'd simply helped a scared child because she needed help. Richard stepped back into the shadows as the elevator doors opened on his floor and Emma wheeled herself out. "Daddy." She rolled toward him, beaming. "A nice man fixed my chair. His name is Marcus, and he has special tools, and he made it work again." Richard knelt and hugged his daughter, relief flooding through him. "I know, baby. I saw." But even as he held Emma, Richard's mind was already moving. He needed to know who this janitor was. He needed to understand why a man with such obvious skill was mopping floors at midnight. He needed to know if what he'd just witnessed was real or an elaborate performance. Because Richard Whitmore had learned the hard way that people always wanted something. Always. The next morning, Marcus Reed was fired. He stood in the basement office of building operations while his supervisor, a thin man named Gerald with a permanent sneer, slid a termination letter across the desk. "What is this?" Marcus stayed at the paper. "I don't understand. Effective immediately, your employment with Whitmore Building Services is terminated." "Why? What did I do?" Gerald leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We received a complaint from an executive tenant. Apparently you were seen harassing a minor on the premises last night." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Harassing? I helped her. Her wheelchair was broken and she was crying and I fixed it." "That's not what the complaint says. It says you approached a vulnerable child, touched her without permission, and engaged in inappropriate contact." "That's insane. I was helping her." The complaint also notes that you kept a toolkit on your maintenance cart. Company policy states that janitors are not authorized to perform mechanical repairs. You exceeded your job description and created a liability situation. Marcus felt the room tilting. "Can I speak to whoever filed the complaint? Can I explain what actually happened?" "That information is confidential. The decision is final." Gerald stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your locker." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to demand justice. But he'd been poor long enough to know that justice was a luxury people like him couldn't afford. He thought about the rent due in 8 days. He thought about Lily's asthma medication that cost $200 a refill. He thought about the grocery budget that was already stretched so thin he'd been eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week so Lily could have real meals. He thought about how he'd just helped a scared little girl, and now his life was falling apart. "Can I at least get a reference?" His voice came out smaller than he intended. Gerald's expression didn't change. Given the circumstances, no. Security walked Marcus out through the service entrance. He carried a cardboard box with his spare work shirt, a thermos, and a photograph of Lily. The morning sun was too bright. The sidewalk was too loud. Everything felt surreal. His phone buzzed. A text from his landlord. "Rent is due on the 3rd. No extensions this month." Marcus sat down on a bus stop bench and put his head in his hands. He didn't cry. He was too tired to cry. Somewhere above him, on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Tower, Richard Whitmore was about to make a phone call that would change everything. But Marcus didn't know that yet. All he knew was that he'd done the right thing, and the world had punished him for it. Marcus Reed had lost his wife, Sarah, 2 years ago to cancer. The medical bills had swallowed their savings first, then their house, then every piece of dignity they'd managed to hold on to. Sarah had been a graphic designer. Marcus had been working as a junior engineer at a medical device startup. They'd been building something, a future, a life. And then Sarah got sick, and the future collapsed like a building with no foundation. The last 6 months of her life, Marcus had taken a leave of absence to care for her. His company had been understanding at first, then sympathetic, then distant. By the time Sarah died, his position had been quietly eliminated in a restructure. He'd applied to engineering jobs, dozens of them, but the resume gap was too suspicious, and employers always found reasons to pass. Too specialized, overqualified, not the right culture fit. The real reason was never spoken aloud, but Marcus knew it. Nobody wanted to hire someone who'd watched their wife die slowly. Nobody wanted that kind of sadness in the office. So he took the janitor job because it was the only offer he got. $11 an hour, night shift, no benefits. It paid just enough to keep Lily fed and housed in a studio apartment in a neighborhood where Marcus checked the locks 3 times before bed. Every morning when he came home, Lily would be asleep on the pull-out couch. He'd stand in the doorway and watch her breathe, grateful that she was healthy, terrified that something would happen to her, paralyzed by the knowledge that he couldn't protect her from the world's cruelty. He'd been good at being invisible, good at doing his job without complaint, good at swallowing his pride every time someone looked through him like he was part of the furniture. Until last night, when he'd helped Emma, invisibility had cost him everything. The first week after being fired, Marcus applied to 23 jobs. Warehouses, grocery stores, fast food, anything. He checked the box for "Do you have reliable transportation?" even though he rode the bus. He left his engineering degree off his resume because people assumed you'd steal from them if you'd fallen that far down. He wrote cover letters in the public library while Lily did her homework beside him, her thin legs swinging from a chair too big for her body. He got 2 callbacks. One was for an overnight stocking position that paid $9 an hour. The other was for a car wash that wanted him to work 10-hour shifts with no overtime. He took both. The car wash fired him after 3 days because he couldn't work fast enough with his bad back. The overnight stocking job kept him, but the paychecks were smaller than what he'd been making at Whitmore Tower. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Marcus stood in the apartment doorway, reading the paper taped to the door, while Lily sat inside doing her spelling homework. She was 8 years old. She believed her father could fix anything. She didn't know they were $300 short on rent and that the landlord had stopped returning Marcus's calls. He peeled the notice off the door before Lily could see it and shoved it into his pocket. That night, after Lily went to sleep, Marcus sat at their tiny kitchen table and did the math. Even if he kept the stocking job, even if he picked up extra shifts, even if he stopped eating lunch entirely, they'd be short. There was no way to make the numbers work. He thought about calling his brother in Phoenix, but they hadn't spoken in 5 years. He thought about social services, but the system was so overwhelmed that families waited months for assistance. He thought about taking Lily out of school and moving somewhere cheaper, but her asthma required a specific climate and consistent medical care. He thought about Sarah, and how she'd made him promise to take care of Lily no matter what, and how he was failing at the only thing that mattered. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Reed, this is Patricia Chen, executive assistant to Richard Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore would like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please respond to confirm your availability." Marcus stated the message. Richard Whitmore, the owner of the building where he'd been fired. The billionaire whose daughter he'd helped. Why would Richard Whitmore want to meet with him? Marcus thought about ignoring it. Thought about the humiliation of facing the man whose company had destroyed his life. Thought about pride and dignity and all the things that didn't matter when you were about to lose your home. He typed back, "I'll be there." What happened in the weeks after Marcus was fired existed in a space between observation and obsession. Richard Whitmore was not a man prone to sentiment, but he found himself unable to stop thinking about the janitor who'd fixed Emma's wheelchair. He'd started by requesting Marcus's employment file. The information was thin. High school education listed, previous employment as various maintenance positions, emergency contact listed as a daughter named Lily. No spouse. No special skills noted. The file made Marcus look like exactly what he appeared to be, a man cleaning floors because he had no other options. But Richard had watched Marcus fix that wheelchair with the precision of someone who understood complex machinery. He'd watched the way Marcus's hands moved, confident and practiced. He'd seen something in that moment that the employment file didn't capture. So Richard had done what he always did when a puzzle interested him. He dug deeper. He had his head of security pull the building's personnel records going back 3 years. Marcus Reed had been employed as a night janitor for 14 months. Perfect attendance. 0 complaints until the harassment allegation. 0 disciplinary actions. The kind of employee who disappeared into the background, reliable and unremarkable. Richard then did something he rarely did. He asked his head of security to look into Marcus's background beyond the company files. What came back was a story that made Richard pause. Marcus Anthony Reed, age 42, widower. Wife deceased from stage 4 pancreatic cancer 26 months prior. Daughter Lily Reed, age 8, enrolled at Riverside Elementary on scholarship assistance. Previous employment, junior engineer at MedTech Solutions from 2019 to 2022. Bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from State University, graduated 2004. Specialized in mobility device design and prosthetics during his time at MedTech. The pieces aligned into a picture that made Richard's chest tighten. This wasn't a janitor who'd stumbled into competence. This was an engineer who'd fallen through the cracks of a system that didn't care about people who chose grief over career advancement. Richard thought about his own daughter. Thought about what he'd do if he lost his wife, Julia. Thought about the fact that Marcus had given up everything to care for Sarah, and the world had punished him for it by making sure he could never climb back up. Richard made another call, this time to his director of building operations. Tell me about the complaint filed against Marcus Reed. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, that's a closed personnel matter. I'm aware. Tell me anyway. Another pause. The complaint was filed by Gerald Moss, the overnight operations supervisor. He reported that Mr. Reed had engaged in inappropriate contact with a minor on the premises and had exceeded his job authority by performing mechanical repairs without certification. Richard's voice went cold. Did anyone speak to the minor in question? I don't believe so, sir. Did anyone review security footage? I don't believe security footage was requested. So Gerald Moss filed a complaint, and you terminated an employee based solely on his word, without any investigation or corroboration. The silence on the other end was answer enough. Pull the security footage from that night. Every camera in the lobby, executive elevator area, and underground parking. Send it to my personal email within the hour. Richard ended the call. An hour later, he sat in his private office and watched the footage. He saw Marcus approach Emma with concern on his face. Saw him kneel carefully. Saw him work on the wheelchair with focused attention. Saw Emma hug him with uninhibited gratitude. Saw Marcus help her into the elevator with the gentleness of a father. There was nothing inappropriate. Nothing threatening. Nothing remotely concerning. What Richard saw was a man helping a scared child because it was the right thing to do. He picked up his phone and called his head of security again. I need you to find out everything you can about Gerald Moss's employment history. I want to know if he has a pattern of complaints against subordinates. I want to know if there's any connection between Moss and other terminations. And I need this information quietly. The report came back the next day. Gerald Moss had been with Whitmore Building Services for 8 years. In that time, he'd filed disciplinary complaints against 17 employees. 14 of those complaints had resulted in termination. The complaints fell into patterns: exceeding job authority, inappropriate conduct, failure to follow protocol, all vague enough to be unchallengeable, specific enough to justify firing. Richard sat back in his chair and felt something unfamiliar. Anger. Not the calculated anger he used in business negotiations. Not the controlled anger he displayed when someone tried to cheat him. This was something raw. This was anger at a system he'd built, a system he'd profited from, a system that allowed men like Gerald Moss to crush people like Marcus Reed because nobody in power was paying attention. He thought about Marcus caring for his dying wife. Thought about Marcus taking a janitor job because it was all he could get. Thought about Marcus fixing Emma's wheelchair even though helping people had only ever hurt him. And he thought about how his company had fired Marcus for doing the exact thing Richard would have wanted him to do. Richard picked up his phone and called his executive assistant. Patricia, I need you to locate Marcus Reed and arrange a meeting. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. And Patricia, I need you to do something else. I need you to pull Gerald Moss's personnel file and prepare termination paperwork. I'll sign it this afternoon. Patricia hesitated. So, terminating a supervisor without cause could open us to liability. There's cause. I'll provide documentation. Just prepare the paperwork. Richard ended the call and looked out his office window at the city below. Somewhere down there, Marcus Reed was struggling to feed his daughter and keep a roof over her head because Richard hadn't been paying attention to what happened in his own building. That was about to change. Marcus stood outside Whitmore Tower at 1:45 the next afternoon, wearing the only dress shirt he owned. It was wrinkled from being folded at the bottom of his closet for 2 years. His shoes were the same ones he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. They pinched his feet, and the left sole had a crack that let in water when it rained. He felt like an imposter walking through the gleaming lobby where he used to mop floors. The security guard didn't recognize him without his janitor's uniform. The elevator was the same one he'd helped Emma into. Everything looked different in daylight. The executive assistant, Patricia, met him on the 42nd floor. She was professional and kind in a way that made Marcus nervous. People were only this nice when they wanted something or when they pitied you. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." She led him down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Marcus would earn in his entire life. They stopped at a door made of dark wood and frosted glass. Patricia knocked once, then opened the door. Richard Whitmore sat behind a desk the size of Marcus's entire kitchen. He was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from never having to worry about rent. "Mr. Reed, please, sit down." Marcus sat in a leather chair that was more comfortable than his bed. Richard studied him for a moment. "I want to start by thanking you for what you did for my daughter." Marcus blinked. "Your daughter?" "Emma, the little girl whose wheelchair you repaired." The pieces clicked into place. Emma was Richard Whitmore's daughter. Marcus had fixed the wheelchair of a billionaire's child, and somehow that had led to him being fired and now summoned to this office. "I was just helping," Marcus said carefully. She was scared. "I know. I saw." Richard leaned forward. "I also know that you were fired the next morning for helping her." Marcus's throat tightened. "Your operations supervisor said there was a complaint, that I'd acted inappropriately." "There was no complaint from Emma or from me. The complaint came from Gerald Moss, your former supervisor." He lied. The words hung in the air. "Why?" Marcus asked. "That's what I've been trying to understand. I had my security team review the footage from that night. I saw exactly what happened. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did everything right." So I dug deeper into Moss's employment history. He has a pattern of filing false complaints against subordinates. 17 complaints in 8 years. 14 terminations. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why would he do that? Control. Ego. A pathological need to wield power over people who can't fight back. The reasons don't matter. What matters is that you were wrongfully terminated, and I'm here to make it right. Marcus wanted to feel relief, wanted to feel vindicated, but he'd been poor too long to trust sudden reversals of fortune. "What does making it right look like?" he asked. Richard slid a folder across the desk. "I had my legal team draw up a settlement offer. Full back pay for the time you've been unemployed. A formal letter of apology and a clean employment record. Gerald Moss has been terminated as of this morning, and I'd like to offer you your job back, if you want it." Marcus opened the folder. The check inside had more zeros than he'd seen in 2 years. It was enough to cover rent. Enough to refill Lily's medication. Enough to stop the eviction. Enough to breathe. But something in him resisted. "I appreciate this, Mr. Whitmore. I really do. But I don't want to go back to mopping floors." Richard's expression didn't change. "What do you want?" Marcus thought about Sarah. Thought about the engineering degree he'd owned working nights and weekends while Sarah supported them both. Thought about the designs he'd created for mobility devices that were probably still in production. Thought about the life he'd built before grief tore it all down. "I want to work in my field again. I want to design things. I want to use my brain instead of just my hands." Richard nodded slowly. "Tell me about your engineering background." And so Marcus did. He talked about his degree, his specialization in mobility equipment, his work at MedTech Solutions. He talked about the prosthetic designs he'd contributed to, the patents he'd helped file, the problems he'd solved. He talked about taking leave to care for Sarah, and how the gap in his resume had made him unemployable in his field. Richard listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Richard said, "I own a medical technology subsidiary, Whittech Medical. They design and manufacture assistive devices, including wheelchairs. I'm going to make a call." Marcus felt hope flicker in his chest, small and fragile as a candle flame. "I can't promise anything," Richard continued, "but I can get you an interview. A real one. What you do with that opportunity is up to you." "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. You don't know me. Richard was quiet for a moment. My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. I was lucky enough to have resources that you didn't have. The best doctors, experimental treatments, private nurses. None of it mattered in the end. She still died, and I still had to figure out how to raise Emma alone. He paused, and Marcus saw real grief in his eyes. When Emma's wheelchair broke, she was terrified. And you helped her without hesitation, even though helping people has only ever hurt you. That tells me something about who you are. The world needs more people like you, Mr. Reed. And I have the power to make sure you don't disappear. Marcus felt his eyes burn. He hadn't cried since Sarah's funeral. He wasn't going to cry now. Thank you, he managed. Don't thank me yet. You still have to earn the job. Richard stood and extended his hand. Marcus shook it, feeling the calluses on his own palm against Richard's smooth skin. As Marcus left the office, Patricia handed him an envelope. The interview is scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. The address is inside. Mr. Whitmore also wanted you to have this. Inside was a letter of recommendation, signed by Richard Whitmore, describing Marcus's character, work ethic, and the skill he'd demonstrated in helping Emma. It was the kind of letter that could open doors. Marcus took the elevator down to the lobby, walked outside, and sat on the same bus stop bench where he'd fallen apart 2 weeks ago. This time, he let himself cry. Not from despair, from the terrifying possibility that things might actually get better. He wiped his eyes, pulled out his phone, and called Lily's school. Hi, this is Marcus Reed. I need to let you know that I'll be picking up Lily early today. We're going to celebrate. That night, Marcus took Lily to a real restaurant. Not fast food. A place with tablecloths and menus and waiters who brought water without asking. Lily ordered chicken fingers and lemonade and ice cream for dessert, and Marcus didn't think about the cost. He just watched his daughter smile. Daddy, why are we celebrating? Lily asked. Because sometimes good things happen, Marcus said. And when they do, we're supposed to notice. Lily grinned, showing the gap where her front tooth used to be. I think good things should happen more. Me too, kiddo. Me too. But what Marcus didn't know yet was that good things and bad things were both about to happen faster than he could process them. The interview at Whittech Medical went better than Marcus had dared to hope. The hiring manager was a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, and she'd actually read his published work from his time at MedTech Solutions. They talked for 2 hours about mobility device design, about the balance between functionality and affordability, about the ways current wheelchair technology failed users with complex needs. Dr. Kim offered him the job before he left the building. Senior Design Engineer. $65,000 a year. Health insurance. Retirement benefits. The kind of job that could rebuild a life. Marcus accepted on the spot. He started the following Monday. The work was challenging and exhausting and exactly what he needed. He was using his mind again, creating solutions to real problems, working with a team that respected his expertise. For 3 weeks, Marcus allowed himself to believe that the worst was over. And then the rumors started. It began with whispers in the break room, conversations that stopped when Marcus entered. Colleagues who'd been friendly suddenly finding reasons to eat lunch elsewhere. On Friday of his 4th week, Dr. Kim called him into her office. Marcus, I need to talk to you about something uncomfortable. His stomach dropped. What's wrong? There's been a complaint filed with HR. It alleges that you received this position through inappropriate means, that you manipulated Richard Whitmore by targeting his daughter. Marcus felt the floor tilt. What? That's insane. I helped Emma when her wheelchair broke. That's all. I believe you. But the complaint is detailed. It claims you researched Whitmore's family, learned about Emma's disability, and engineered a situation where you could approach her under the guise of helping. It claims you used your daughter's situation to create a sympathetic narrative. It claims Richard Whitmore hired you out of misplaced guilt and that you're unqualified for this position. Who filed the complaint? Dr. Kim hesitated. That's confidential. But Marcus already knew. Gerald Moss. Fired, bitter, and determined to destroy Marcus's second chance the way he destroyed the first. What happens now? Marcus asked. HR is opening an investigation. You're not suspended, but you're under review. I need you to cooperate fully with their inquiry. Marcus left Dr. Kim's office feeling like he'd been punched. 3 weeks ago, he'd been living in a miracle. Now he was back in a nightmare, accused of crimes he didn't commit by a man who existed solely to exercise petty cruelty. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark of their small apartment, listening to Lily breathe in the space they'd carved out for her behind a folding screen, and felt the walls closing in. His phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. A text from an unknown number. You think you can steal from me? Think you can play victim and get rich? I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are. Marcus stayed at the message. It could only be from Moss. Another message arrived. Your daughter's school is Riverside Elementary, right? Pretty little thing. Be ashamed if she knew what kind of father she really has. The fear that shot through Marcus was primal. He sat up in bed, heart hammering. Moss was threatening Lily. Marcus wanted to call the police. Wanted to show someone the messages. Wanted to protect his daughter. But he'd been poor long enough to know that the police didn't help people like him. That reporting threats often made things worse. That the system protected property and power, not children living in studio apartments. He deleted the messages and lay back down, mind racing. By morning, he'd made a decision. He was going to quit Whittech Medical. He was going to walk away from the job, from Richard Whitmore, from the whole tangled mess. He was going to disappear back into invisibility where men like Moss couldn't find him. It was the only way to keep Lily safe. Marcus walked into Dr. Kim's office at 8:30 Monday morning with his resignation letter. I can't do this, he told her. The investigation, the rumors, the stress. It's not worth it. I'm resigning, effective immediately. Dr. Kim looked at him with something like sadness. Marcus, I think you should reconsider. These allegations are baseless. HR is going to clear you. It doesn't matter if they clear me. The damage is done. People will always wonder. I can't live like that. My daughter can't live like that. Will you at least talk to Richard Whitmore before you make this final? Marcus shook his head. I've taken enough from him. I'm done. He left the building before Dr. Kim could argue further. What Marcus didn't know was that Dr. Kim called Richard Whitmore the moment he walked out the door. And Richard Whitmore was about to do something that would change everything. Richard Whitmore sat in his office and listened to Dr. Kim explain what had happened. Listened to the allegations against Marcus. Listened to the resignation that Marcus had just submitted. And Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years. White-hot rage. He ended the call with Dr. Kim and immediately contacted his head of security. I need you to trace a phone number. He rattled off the number that had sent threatening messages to Marcus, messages that Marcus had deleted but that Richard's IT team had recovered from phone records with a court order. The trace took 4 hours. The number belonged to Gerald Moss. Richard called his legal team. I need you to prepare harassment charges and a restraining order against Gerald Moss. I also need you to file a lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference. I want every communication he's made about Marcus Reed subpoenaed. I want his employment records from every company he's worked for. I want him buried so deep he never surfaces again. His lead attorney hesitated. Sir, this is going to be expensive and time-consuming. Are you sure you want to pursue this? I've never been more sure of anything. Richard then did something unprecedented. He called an emergency meeting of his entire executive leadership team. 20 people gathered in the conference room, confused and concerned. Richard stood at the head of the table. 4 weeks ago, a janitor in our building helped my daughter when she was hurt and scared. His name is Marcus Reed. He is a widower and a single father. He is a mechanical engineer who fell through the cracks of an unforgiving system. He helped Emma because it was the right thing to do. And for that act of kindness, he was fired by Gerald Moss, a supervisor who has spent 8 years terrorizing employees. Richard let that sink in. I hired Marcus into Whittech Medical because he deserved a second chance. And now he's being targeted again by the same man who destroyed his first chance. Moss has filed false complaints. He's spread rumors. He sent threatening messages about Marcus's 8-year-old daughter. The room was silent. I'm telling you this because I'm done being the kind of company that allows this to happen. I'm done profiting from a system that crushes good people while protecting bullies. Effective immediately, we are implementing a full review of our HR practices across all subsidiaries. We are creating a whistleblower protection program. We are establishing an independent board to investigate employee complaints. And we are going to make damn sure that what happened to Marcus Reed never happens to anyone else in a company I own. Richard looked around the table. If anyone has a problem with this, you can leave now. Nobody moved. Good. Now someone find Marcus Reed and tell him his resignation is rejected. Tell him he's not going anywhere. And tell him I'm calling a press conference tomorrow to make a public statement about what happened. Patricia, his executive assistant, raised her hand tentatively. So, are you sure you want to go public with this? It could damage the company's reputation. Richard smiled without humor. Our reputation is that we make money. I'd rather have a reputation for giving a damn about people. Find Marcus. 20 minutes later, Richard's head of security located Marcus at Riverside Elementary, picking up Lily from school early. Richard drove there himself. He found Marcus standing in the parking lot, holding Lily's hand. The little girl was chattering about her day, oblivious to her father's tension. "Mr. Reed," Richard called out. Marcus turned, and Richard saw exhaustion in his face. Defeat. The same expression Richard had seen on his own face in the mirror after Julia died. "Mr. Whitmore, I already resigned. There's nothing left to say. Actually, there's a lot to say. But first, I'd like to meet your daughter." Marcus hesitated, then knelt beside Lily. "Lily, this is Mr. Whitmore. He's the father of the little girl I helped a few weeks ago." Lily looked up at Richard with curious eyes. The one whose chair was broken. "That's right," Richard said, crouching down to her level. "Your dad fixed her chair and made her feel safe. He's a hero." Lily beamed. "My dad's the best." Richard felt his throat tighten. He stood and looked at Marcus. "Can we talk? Privately?" Marcus nodded to Lily. "Go sit on that bench over there for a minute." "Okay." Lily skipped off, and Marcus turned to Richard with guarded eyes. "I know about the threats," Richard said. "I know about the messages Moss sent. I know why you resigned. And I'm here to tell you that you're not running anymore. He threatened my daughter. I know, and is going to pay for it. I've already filed legal action against him. Harassment, defamation, tortious interference. My legal team is going to make sure he never works in this city again. But more than that, I'm going to stand up publicly and tell the truth about what happened to you." Marcus shook his head. "I don't want publicity. I just want to keep my daughter safe. The best way to keep her safe is to make sure Moss knows he can't hide. Silence protects predators, Marcus. Speaking up protects victims." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Why do you care this much?" "Because when Julia died, I was surrounded by people who told me they understood. They didn't. They couldn't. But you understand. You've lived it. You survived it. You kept going for your daughter even when everything fell apart. That kind of strength is rare. And watching my company destroy you for helping Emma made me realize that I've been part of a system that values profit over people. I want to change that. But I need you to help me." "How?" "Come back to WITTech. Keep doing the work you're good at. Let me handle Moss and the legal battles. And when the press conference happens tomorrow, stand with me and tell your story. Not for sympathy, for accountability, so that other people in your position know they're not alone." Marcus looked over at Lily, sitting on the bench, kicking her legs and humming to herself. "If I do this, if I go public, it's going to get messy. People are going to dig into my life, into Sarah's death, into our finances, into every mistake I've made. Let them dig. You've got nothing to hide." Marcus turned back to Richard. "What if they don't believe me?" "They will, because I'm going to show them the security footage, the threatening messages, Gerald Moss's employment record. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be documented." Marcus took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll do it." Richard extended his hand. "Thank you." They shook, and Richard felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. This was something bigger. This was using his power for something that actually mattered. The press conference the next day was held in the lobby of Whitmore Tower. Richard stood at a podium with Marcus beside him. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Richard spoke first. 4 weeks ago, an employee of mine committed an act of extraordinary kindness. Marcus Reed, a night janitor, helped my 6-year-old daughter when her wheelchair broke and she was scared and alone. He used his expertise as a mechanical engineer to repair her chair and get her to safety. The next morning, he was fired for doing so. The room erupted in murmurs. Richard held up a hand. The termination was based on false allegations filed by a supervisor with a documented history of abusing his authority. I have since learned that this supervisor, Gerald Moss, has filed 17 similar complaints over 8 years, resulting in 14 wrongful terminations. Marcus Reed is one of 14 people whose lives were destroyed by a system I failed to monitor. Richard paused, letting that sink in. I am here today to take responsibility for that failure and to announce several changes. First, Gerald Moss has been terminated and is facing legal action for harassment and defamation. Second, we are implementing comprehensive HR reforms across all Whitmore companies. Third, we are establishing a fund to provide restitution to the 13 other employees who were wrongfully terminated. Richard turned to Marcus. Mr. Reed, would you like to say anything? Marcus stepped to the microphone. His hands were shaking. 2 years ago, my wife Sarah died from cancer. I took time off work to care for her, and when she died, I couldn't find another engineering job. I became a janitor because it was the only work I could get. I mopped floors and cleaned bathrooms and tried to keep my daughter fed. And when I saw Emma crying because her wheelchair was broken, I didn't think about consequences. I just helped, because that's what you do when a child is scared. His voice cracked. I got fired for it. I thought my life was over. But Mr. Whitmore gave me a second chance. And then someone tried to take that away too. I'm standing here today because Mr. Whitmore decided that the truth mattered more than protecting his company's image. That's rare. That's courage. Marcus looked directly at the cameras. If you're someone who's been fired unfairly, if you're someone who's fallen through the cracks, if you're someone who thinks nobody sees you, I want you to know that you're not alone. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone with power will actually use it to help you. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Another person joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Richard watched Marcus accept the recognition with quiet dignity and felt something he hadn't felt since Julia died. Pride, not in himself, in the choice to do something right. The story went viral within hours. Major news outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with support for Marcus and outrage at Gerald Moss. 3 of the other wrongfully terminated employees came forward with their own stories. Whittech Medical received over 1,000 job applications from people who said they wanted to work for a company that valued integrity. Gerald Moss was arrested 2 days later for criminal harassment. His trial date was set for 6 months out. Marcus returned to work at Whittech. Dr. Kim assigned him to a project designing affordable wheelchair modifications for children with complex mobility needs. The work was challenging and meaningful and exactly what Marcus had dreamed of doing before his life fell apart. 3 months after the press conference, Marcus and Lily moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Lily's asthma was under control. Her grades were improving. She'd made friends who came over for playdates. Marcus still thought about Sarah every day, but the grief had softened into something he could carry without breaking. On a Saturday afternoon, Richard Whitmore invited Marcus and Lily to his house for dinner. It was a massive estate in the suburbs, the kind of place that made Marcus uncomfortable. But Emma had specifically asked if Lily could come over, and Lily had been talking about it for a week. The girls played in Emma's room while the adults sat in the kitchen. Richard's housekeeper prepared dinner. Marcus tried not to think about how much the meal probably cost. "How's the wheelchair project going?" Richard asked. "Good. We're in final testing for the modular design. If it passes, it'll cut manufacturing costs by 40% while improving functionality. I read your latest report. It's impressive work." Marcus smiled. "It feels good to be using my brain again." Richard was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something personal? Do you ever regret helping Emma that night, knowing everything that happened afterward?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "No, I'd do it again, even knowing the cost." "Why?" "Because some things matter more than the cost. Emma needed help. I could provide it. That's enough." Richard nodded slowly. "Julia would have liked you. Sarah would have liked you too. They sat in comfortable silence until the girls came running into the kitchen, breathless and laughing. "Daddy, can Lily stay for a sleepover?" Emma asked. Lily looked at Marcus with hopeful eyes. Marcus glanced at Richard, who shrugged. "Fine with me if it's fine with you." "Please, Daddy," Lily begged. Marcus pretended to consider it. "I suppose. But you have to promise to be good." Lily threw her arms around his neck. "I promise." As the girls ran off to plan their evening, Richard refilled Marcus's coffee. "You know," Richard said, "I've been thinking about starting a foundation. Something focused on supporting single parents who are trying to rebuild their lives after loss. Job training, housing assistance, mental health resources. I'd like you to help me design it." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Why me?" "Because you've lived it. You know what people actually need, not what wealthy donors think they need." Marcus thought about the 2 years he'd spent invisible and struggling. Thought about all the other people still trapped in that space. "I'd be honored," he said. 6 months later, the Reed Whitmore Foundation launched with an initial endowment of $20 million. Marcus served as director of programs. The foundation provided support to over 300 families in its first year. Gerald Moss was convicted of harassment and sentenced to probation and community service. He never worked in management again. Emma's wheelchair was permanently repaired with a custom design that Marcus created specifically for her needs. She named it Marcus after the man who'd first helped her. Lily Reed thrived in her new school. She joined the science club and developed a passion for engineering, inspired by watching her father work. Marcus still kept Sarah's photo on his desk, still talked to Lily about her mother, still felt the loss, but he'd learned that grief and joy could exist in the same space. That falling apart didn't mean you couldn't be put back together. That sometimes kindness was repaid, even when you didn't expect it. On the anniversary of the night he'd helped Emma, Marcus returned to Whitmore Tower. He stood in the lobby where it had all started, where he'd knelt beside a scared little girl and decided to help despite the consequences. He thought about how close he'd come to losing everything, how close he'd come to giving up. He thought about the fact that sometimes, rarely, the world rewarded decency instead of punishing it. Richard found him there, standing in front of the spot where Emma's wheelchair had tipped over. "You all right?" Richard asked. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Just remembering." "What are you remembering?" "That sometimes fixing broken things is worth the risk." Richard smiled. "Always worth the risk." They stood together in the empty lobby, 2 fathers who'd lost their wives, 2 men who'd found purpose in protecting what remained, 2 people who'd learned that power and kindness weren't mutually exclusive. Somewhere above them, Emma and Lily were having a sleepover. Tomorrow, Marcus would go back to designing equipment that would help thousands of children. Tomorrow, Richard would continue reforming his companies to prioritize people over profit. But tonight, in this moment, they simply stood in the space where everything had changed, where a janitor had helped a child, where invisibility had become visibility, where kindness had, against all odds, been repaid. Marcus thought about the people who'd come to the foundation seeking help. Single parents working 3 jobs. Engineers who'd lost their careers to grief. People who'd been fired for the crime of being human. He thought about how many of them thanked him with tears in their eyes, grateful that someone finally saw them. He thought about Sarah, and how she'd always believed that doing the right thing mattered, even when it cost you everything. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe the cost was always worth it. Marcus turned to Richard. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Richard shook his head. "You were never invisible, Marcus. You were just surrounded by people who'd stopped looking." They left the lobby together, walking out into the evening air where their daughters were waiting, where their futures were unfolding, where broken things were being repaired one day at a time. And somewhere in the city, another person was struggling. Another single parent was working a job they were overqualified for. Another widow was trying to hold her family together with nothing but determination and hope. The world was still full of injustice, still full of cruelty, still full of systems designed to crush people who couldn't fight back. But it was also full of moments like this. Moments where someone in power chose to see. Moments where kindness was repaid. Moments where the invisible became visible. And that had to be enough.